A message leaves your phone. Then the screen goes quiet. You check again later. Still nothing. No explanation. No argument. No obvious ending. Just their name sitting there, with your words underneath it, and no words coming back. A week ago, this person answered in minutes. Now the messages just sit there. Blue check marks. No response. You start replaying the last conversation. Did you say something wrong? Did you push too hard? Did you ask for too much? But here is what most people never consider. Sometimes silence has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it is not punishment. Sometimes it is not distance. Sometimes it is a person quietly running out of words they know how to say. Because people who go quiet without explaining why rarely wake up one day and decide to disappear. The silence is not the beginning. The silence is the ending of something that started long before you noticed. Before someone disappears into silence, the change usually arrives quietly. Not as a dramatic goodbye. Not as a sudden cut. More like a room slowly losing light before anyone says it is getting dark. A reply that used to come in minutes now takes hours. A message that used to be 3 paragraphs is now 3 words. Yeah. Sure. Okay. You notice it. But you tell yourself it is nothing. Maybe they are just busy. Maybe it is a rough week. Maybe it will pass. And for a while, it does look like it is passing. They are still there. But not in the same way. They answer, but the warmth arrives later. They show up, but something in them feels farther away. And you can feel it before you can explain it. The connection has not ended. It has just started asking for less space inside them. This is what most people miss about the beginning of withdrawal. It rarely looks like withdrawal. It looks like tiredness. It looks like a busy season. It looks like nothing worth mentioning. But underneath, something is already shifting. Here is a small, specific behavior worth noticing. Watch how someone answers a question that used to excite them. If their answers get shorter, not because they do not understand the question, but because they do not have the energy to unpack it anymore. That is not boredom. That is a nervous system quietly asking for less. Most people read this wrong. They think they do not care about this anymore. Often, it is the opposite. They cared so much for so long that caring has become expensive, and they are trying to spend less of themselves. Not because the topic changed, but because they have less left to give. This is where the confusion usually starts. Because from the outside, it looks like fading interest. From the inside, it feels like running on empty while still trying to show up. If you have ever noticed someone slowly answering less, without ever saying why, drop a word quiet in the comments. It might mean more than you think. Here is the part almost no one expects. Going quiet is not always about the other person. Often, it is about running out of language. Because to explain why you are pulling away, you first have to understand it yourself. And most people who go quiet do not fully understand it either. They just know that answering feels heavier than it used to. They just know that showing up costs something they cannot quite name. They just know that opening their mouth to explain feels harder than staying silent. So here is the twist most people never consider. Silence is not always avoidance. Sometimes silence is what happens when someone does not have the words yet and would rather say nothing than say it wrong. Think about the last time you tried to explain a feeling you did not fully understand. The sentences came out clumsy, half-formed, not quite right. And maybe you thought, this is not coming out the way I mean it, and stopped trying altogether. Now imagine feeling that way, but the topic is your own exhaustion, your own retreat, your own need for distance from someone you still care about. Explaining that requires a kind of clarity most people do not have in the middle of the exhaustion itself. So instead of explaining badly, they say nothing at all. They sit with the phone in their hand. The conversation is open. Your message is right there. And for a while, they do nothing but stare at it, as if the right sentence might appear if they wait long enough. So they close the screen, not because they have no feelings, because every sentence feels like it could be misunderstood before it even leaves their hand. And here is the punchline that changes how you see this pattern. People do not usually go quiet because they stopped caring. They go quiet because caring, without being able to explain why it hurts, becomes too heavy to carry in words. Silence, in this case, is not rejection. It is a person protecting you from a half-formed explanation that might sound worse than the truth actually is. But there is a cost to this protection, because while they are protecting you from one kind of confusion, you are left with another, the kind where you fill in the blanks yourself. And usually, what you imagine is worse than what is actually happening. And this is the cruel part of unanswered messages. They do not only leave you waiting. They turn your mind into a detective, You start searching for evidence inside every small memory. The tone of their last reply. The delay before they said goodnight. The moment they looked tired and you told yourself not to overthink it. And slowly, silence stops feeling like silence. It starts feeling like a room where your insecurity gets louder because no one is there to correct the story. That is why being left without words can hurt so deeply. Not because you are weak. Not because you need too much reassurance. But because a human mind will always try to explain an empty space. And when the other person gives you no language, your fear starts writing the script for them. So yes, their silence may not be about you. But your pain still makes sense. Being kept outside the truth can make even a caring person feel replaceable. Because what hurts is not only that they went quiet. It is that their quiet left you alone with every explanation you were afraid was true. And nobody should have to carry that alone forever. Let's go deeper into what is actually happening inside someone who goes quiet without explanation. It rarely starts with a single event. It usually starts with an accumulation. Small disappointments that were never said out loud. Moments of feeling unheard that were swallowed instead of spoken. Times they showed up fully, and it was not met the same way back. None of these moments feel big enough on their own to bring up. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I do not want to make this into something. So they do not say anything. They just quietly note it and move on. But the nervous system keeps score, even when the mind decides not to. Each unspoken disappointment becomes a small brick. One brick does not build a wall, but bricks add up. And eventually, without a single dramatic moment, a wall exists where there used to be an open door. Here is the twist that reframes almost everything up to this point. People rarely go quiet because of one big reason. They go quiet because they ran out of small moments where speaking up felt safe enough to try. This is why, when you finally ask, "Did I do something?" they might genuinely say no. And they are not lying to you. From their perspective, there was not one thing. There were 50 small things. And no version of the conversation that felt worth having 50 separate times. So instead of 50 conversations, there is one long silence. And by the time someone finally asks what happened, the person going quiet may not know where to begin. Do they start with the joke that hurt more than it should have? The night they felt ignored? The message they answered kindly while feeling unseen? The moment they realized they were always explaining, always adjusting, always trying to make the connection feel lighter than it actually felt? So they say, "It's fine." Not because it is fine, but because the truth has become too large to fit inside one conversation. If this is starting to sound like someone you know, or maybe like a pattern you recognize in yourself, type "still here" in the comments. Let's see how many people are quietly carrying the same thing. Here is something important that changes how you should respond to someone who goes quiet. Withdrawal is not always giving up. Sometimes withdrawal is a person trying to find their footing before they fall completely. Imagine someone standing on ground that keeps shifting under them. Their instinct is not to explain the shifting ground to everyone watching. Their instinct is to plant their feet, go still, and stop moving until they feel steady again. That stillness looks like disappearing, but it might actually be someone trying to survive an internal collapse quietly, so it does not spill onto everyone around them. This is the part most people misread the hardest. They see stillness and assume it means the relationship, the friendship, or the connection no longer matters. But sometimes, the opposite is true. Sometimes a person goes quiet specifically with the people who matter most, because they do not want those people to see them struggling, breaking, or unraveling in real time. They will disappear from the person they love before they let that person watch them fall apart. Read that again, because it changes the entire emotional logic of silence. Going quiet is not always distance. Sometimes it is an attempt at dignity. Sometimes it is quietly saying, "I do not want you to see me like this," instead of loudly saying, "I am struggling." And here is the punchline that lands hardest. The people who disappear the most gracefully are often the ones fighting the loudest battles inside. Battles nobody was ever invited to see. So if silence is not always rejection, and it is not always giving up, then what is it protecting? Usually, more than one thing. It protects the small amount of capacity they have left. Because when someone feels emptied out, even one more message can feel like another place they are expected to pour from. It protects the connection from the version of them they are afraid might come out. The irritated version. The half-present version. The version that might say something too sharp because they waited too long to admit they were overwhelmed. And sometimes, It protects you from a truth they do not yet know how to say without hurting both of you. Not because you do not deserve clarity, but because the explanation is still unfinished inside them. They start to answer, then stop. A sentence appears, then disappears. Another one almost makes it out, but something in them pulls it back before it becomes real. So the screen goes empty again, and the silence continues. Not because they are trying to be cruel, because every version of the truth still feels either too small, too messy, or too dangerous to send. Here is the reframe that ties this all together. People who go quiet without explaining why are rarely trying to hurt you. They are usually trying to survive something they cannot yet put into words, while trying not to make it your responsibility to fix. That does not mean the silence does not hurt. It does. But understanding what it is protecting can change how you carry that hurt. If you are on the receiving end of this silence, here is the hardest and most important thing to remember. Silence is information, not always an answer. It tells you something is happening. It does not always tell you what, or how long, or whether it will change. You are allowed to feel hurt by the distance. You are also allowed to leave space for it, without assuming the worst version of the story. And if you are the one who has gone quiet, without fully knowing how to explain why know this, you do not owe anyone a perfectly articulate explanation before you are allowed to protect your own capacity. And still, there comes a point where silence cannot be the only language. Not right away. Not before the body feels steady. Not before the words have stopped feeling dangerous. But somewhere inside the relationships that still matter, silence eventually has to become a bridge back to honesty. Because space can protect someone. But if it never opens again, it becomes a wall. And the people left outside that wall may still be hurt by what they were never given words for. Because the goal was never to disappear completely. The goal was to survive long enough to find the words you did not have yet. If this video gave language to something you have lived through, either as the one who went quiet, or the one waiting for an answer that never came, subscribe to Cortex Psychology. We explore the quiet psychology behind human behavior, the patterns most people misread, and the emotional logic hiding underneath silence, distance, and disconnection. Because sometimes silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the place where a feeling went when it could not find language. An understanding that does not erase the hurt, but it can stop you from turning every unanswered message into proof that you were never cared for. Sometimes the silence is still painful, but now at least it has a shape.